You're gonna kill the love of my life.
Casey!
If I don't go back to what I was doing.
Our line of work is quite brutal and quite ruthless.
How far would you go for love?
You steal truck, bring it to me. Then you make your money.
Is it dangerous?
Of course it's dangerous!
Nicholas Hoult, Felicity Jones, with Ben Kingsley and Anthony Hopkins.
All this trouble, all this pain, for love.
Collide, now playing. Rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13.
Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, and welcome to Venus Unplugged, the virtual Heartbreak Hotel. This is Llorraine Neithardt, your host, and we're starting right on time. Last week I got tricked, but hopefully not again. The purpose of these blogs, these talks, is to evoke and re-image and relate to the feminine, both within and without, within men and within women, to explore the nature of Venus, the infinite one, heaven, earth, and hell, to explore the archetype of Psyche and what are archetypes that are operating. One of the most interesting things is it takes time and for people to understand and even consider that Psyche, the unconscious, is really running the show. Okay, as much as, yes, we're ego, we work on ourselves, what are we becoming conscious of? We're becoming conscious of what we're unconscious to. So the unconscious is not unconscious. We are unconscious to it. So there are so many things in life's relationships and stories that we swear, no, I'm this way, or we assume that we're viewing something clearly, when in fact we are watching the unconscious in action, right? Or you'll have an intention. Sometimes it just happens in the simplest way. You have an intention to say something, and something completely else comes out. It's some people call it a Freudian slip. I call it a Jungian truth. This is my work. I'm constantly stirring the mix and am devoted and fascinated by all things of Psyche. As my spiritual teacher told me many years ago, the only way to heaven is through the gates of hell, and that's where she took me. So I would like to start exploring the eternal feminine. What the heck is that? Okay. I've started to read and have actually completed reading. It's an easy read, a great read. It's called Out of the Shadows, and it's a story of Toni Wolff and Emma Jung, and it's actually a play. And Emma Jung was Mrs. Jung, Frau Jung, and was the wife of Carl Jung, and I think it was 5 children, and then eventually she became into her own power as a writer, as a Jungian, all those things. And Toni Wolff, who was Carl Jung's mistress of many, many years. And this is a story and a dialogue between these two. But what is so interesting is a dialogue between two eternal archetypal patterns. So I'm going to be exploring 4 archetypes. The mother, and the opposite of the mother archetype is the Hetera. And so that's the in the realm of relationships. And in the it's still related. In the impersonal is the medial woman, and the opposite of that is the Amazon. So we are going to begin to explore this, and we're going to explore this in literature and a little bit of film, okay, because there's some things I found that I think are very fascinating to illustrate. Now, this is a huge and deep subject matter, and I'm just touching upon it so that you can start to just notice and become aware, like, wow, don't get upset. Just see, observe what is the hidden pattern, right? In these vast aspects of the archetypal feminine, right? And they have shadow and light, and so I'm going to be touching on as much as I can over the next couple of weeks. So with an introduction, you see, these types, today, as I said, we're going to deal with the mother and the Hetara, okay? The Hetara is an ancient word meaning female companion. And in ancient Greece, women were brought in, the wives and mothers. They usually were not educated, and they were secluded. Their realm was in the home, taking care of the children. That was the deal. And these Hetaras were kind of courtesans or geishas, Greek geishas. So they were known for their heightened intelligence, their beauty, and they were trained in the arts. They were trained in politics, music, all things that would entertain and engage the masculine. Okay. Now we still have this today because whether we know it or not, we'll identify with one of these archetypes. So today I'm just talking about the opposite of mother and Hetara, particularly because of this play that I just read about Tony Wolfe and Emma Jung, which are fabulous examples of these types and how they relate and how they don't relate. And how, in the opposite, our redemption is always in the shadow. Our redemption is always in the opposite. Our redemption is like, oh, I would never do that. Well, guess what? You've got to do it. All right? Sometimes we have to sin in the sense of the sacred in order to retain our soul. We have to do the forbidden to understand what that's about. If we just become one-sided, it's death. It's psychic death. Okay. See, and the greatest problem is when we're ruled by a particular archetype. Okay, and then we remain caught in that principle of the archetype and its patterns, but we don't. And it's a self-image. It's a position we take, but it becomes a slow death because we never develop anything else. So yes, we all have superior function and inferior function. Inferior does not mean less than. Inferior just means kind of like dull and little known, okay? But in astrology, we would see it as the sun sign, okay? We identify with sun sign. And we can all recognize that when we know astrology. It's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's just like name the sun sign and then fill it in. Okay. So the mother archetype is the one that identifies, okay, her main force in life or her main direction in life is the children. And very often she does not care for the child within, okay, and not particularly the man is second. And men will feel this sometimes. The woman has, and it always comes as a shock. It's like, wow, she had children, and then I became second. It was like, well, that's because she's, that's what she carries. That's her identity. The mother is not as involved in the relationship with the male as she is with the child, or she will treat the male as her lover as her child. The old men never grow up. I've never understood that. It's like, well, who's helping them not grow up? There must be a conspiracy. And very often it's the mother's type because they mother them rather than relate to them as individuals. Now, these are general statements. These are not specific to everybody's relationship. I'm just stirring the mix. And under these eclipses, I must be out of my mind to be bringing this stuff up, but I'm going for it anyway. What's an eclipse without stirring the shit? I mean, we got to do this. The sacred dark matter that is in all of us. That's really where the energy is, right? So the mother, she represents the feminine that wants to take care of the children. Every Every child is cared for. The earth is cared for. These are all the things that she wants to relate to. Now, there are times with the mother. Okay, so we're going to use the example of Emma Jung. Emma Jung was as I said, the wife and mother, and her job was to take care of the children. Although, by the way, she happened to be the second richest woman in Switzerland. Uncle Carl Jung, he was a Leo. He married those rich ladies. He was smart, all right? He also helped them grow enormously. So Emma Jung, okay? And she was, the grounded, the root, the tree, the essence of Jung's, it was the foundation. Without her, he would not be able to explore the depths of who he is. I mean, she married the great man. She knew she was marrying the great man. But he also knew he needed somebody solid. And that was her. Okay. Then comes along, okay, Toni Wolff. And Toni Wolff is a young woman of 19. Her father also from an affluent, wealthy family. And her father died. She's very much a father's daughter. Her father loved her and deeply, and she studied with him, and she studied in his library, and she became the perfect daughter companion. All right, trained to be the companion of the male. All right, and then he dies. So Toni Wolff's mother finds out about the Jungian work and takes Toni Wolff, the young woman, to Jung to be analyzed. And Toni is, highly intellectual. She doesn't really see the purpose of Jung's psychology. But in due time, and she's on kind of a borderline, due to her suffering and loss of her father. And in due time, she starts to understand the wisdom of Jung's work, and he analyzes her, and also simultaneously begins to realize how bright she is, to do research, the depth of what she understands. She's also trained in Latin and Greek, and so she really is quite an educated and brilliant woman, and not bad on the eye either. And then after their analysis of about 3 years, they begin a love affair. Mrs. Jung knows about this because she's watching it. Okay. Now we're also dealing with turn-of-the-century Europe, so we don't have quite the same. I mean, we still psychically have the same outrage when that happens if we do not understand the position. But that's one of the most brilliant examples in life of two women. Okay, the mother wife and the lover mistress having to coexist for them both to develop and their relationship and what begins to happen. So before we judge anything about that hussy, and believe me, Toni Wolff really suffered that. They did not understand what Jung needed. He could not get it from his wife. She was identified totally with the mother. All right, and on some deep level, Emma Jung understood this because later on, after Toni Wolff had passed over, Emma Jung gives great gratitude and says, because when Jung had his breakdown, Toni Wolff was the only one who could go into his psychosis, into his woundedness, and she then wound up analyzing Jung to help him out of his woundedness and his madness. So this is a very complex. This can't, and any of this, or actually any relationship, it's just too easy to name and blame. But if we really become interested in the story, the plot, the unconscious, what's happening, how is psyche unfolding, her mystery, her story. So these two eternal archetypes of mother opposed to lover. And remember a few weeks ago I was talking about We can marry the father husband or the wife mother, but then the lover very often goes off nowhere, someplace else, or we just pick up with somebody else because it has to live out because there's a split within ourselves. So this is once again somewhat on that theme, all right? And this is also an eternal fight between women, all right? The Heritar, okay, that's what she wants. She doesn't really want to be married. Sometimes it's her secret wish, but the truth of the matter is she wants to be the companion. She likes that position of equality. All right, she doesn't get the privilege of the wife, and she doesn't get to go to the corporate party. But it's a completely. There was an old book many years ago that I read, and I'm going to find it again. It was called Advice from an Old Mistress to a Young Bride, and it's really quite interesting. There's a place for all of us, and whatever type we are, that's what we're going to live out. Of course, its shadow is the redemption, or the secret longing. And if we make that conscious, we can start to feel more of a balance. All right. So this is a very powerful opposition that we live through. Okay. So the mother as an archetype, it's the woman whose primary ego or priority is the well-being of her children or charges. Okay. This is very important, and becoming the mother, she becomes the mother to everybody, to sisters, families, everybody, except herself and her husband. She doesn't always do that. She doesn't reflect. So the mother archetype, now the shadow side of the mother archetype is her indomitable will to power over those she loves and feels she must extend her attention, her power, her wisdom. You know, mother says, okay, the opposite of love is power. She wants the children in her protectiveness to do what she says. Okay, sometimes the child doesn't feel loved because the child isn't being related to as they are, but as the will of the mother in her overprotectiveness, sometimes a Hera type. Okay, she stands for the law and the order and the well-being of the children. And each one is not better, greater, or lesser than the other. And that's one of the most interesting things about the work of psyche, the work of the unconscious. We don't like grab on and say, this is the absolute truth, and now I can go to sleep. I mean, the interesting, it's almost like flamenco dancing, the Jungian stuff, because you're making a lot of noise and you're moving around, but you've got to be grounded in these forces, these elements that are always moving through us. And when we try to concretize, which means we get one stand and we're going to stand in this windstorm, this tornado that's moving through our life, and it's the opposite. It's we're being asked to look at something completely different, okay? And consider it. Consider it that what does it mean in our lives? So today I want to do a little bit of an overview and and then eventually get into the shadow aspect, the thing I love the most. Of course, whatever we don't know about ourselves does return to us as fate. There was, what did I do with that? Maybe with all my pieces of paper. Can't find that right now. There was a quote that I found from Jung, and this is C.G. Jung, famous Swiss psychiatrist. When real love comes into your life, what is your first response? And he says, to run like hell in the opposite direction, because where love is present, the danger is the greatest because God is the nearest. Okay? When real love comes into your life, what is your first response? To run like hell in the opposite direction, because where love is present, the danger is the greatest because God is the nearest. And I see that to be true very often. We will attach to the one, to the person or the situation that carries out the archetype that we identify with. Okay, and that's not always love. That's just good, kind of compulsive. All right. Now, the Heritar, okay, is the woman who identifies with the male, who men find very easy to be with. They include her. She has the capacity to mirror their anima, their inner soul, and the man feels smarter around them and brighter around them. She can be an inspiration. She can encourage them to be greater than they ever thought they could be, or she holds that space for their soul. Okay. Not that the wife does too, but the wife mother does that too, but in a different way. And the Heritar more relates to the sexual side. Okay. And now the Heritar isn't necessarily a sexual companion. She can be. But that is not the primary dynamic of that archetype. It is to relate to the male, and or to the great man, or to the brilliance. And we see so much of this in literature. Women who who assisted the great men didn't get too much publicity for it, and that's what we're starting to become conscious of. It's like, wait a second. If we understand how these archetypes live in our life and in our community throughout history and into present time, we can then start, assigning and getting the credit and understanding and reflecting. Right? So, for instance, the mother can be anyone from Demeter, the archetypal story of Demeter, and her daughter Persephone is abducted, taken into the underworld, and she loses her cookie altogether, and she's separated from the daughter. That mother type, when it's separated from the child, it suffers enormously. So if a mother is entering the second adulthood or the empty nest, the suffering is enormous. She doesn't know what to do because she's identified with that, okay? So it can be anywhere from Demeter to Mother Goose to the old woman who lived in the shoe, okay, had so many children, okay? And the Heritar, okay, is, I'm going to read one example of Veronica Franco, which happens to be one of my favorite characters in history. And if you get a chance seeing the film Dangerous Beauties, which is the story of Veronica Franco, when I first saw this movie, which didn't make a big hit in Hollywood, but it certainly did in my life, I got so involved in the beauty of it all and the storyline, okay, because she's also a poetess, that I read the PhD that the book, that the film was made, okay? So she's been a deep archetypal figure in my inner world, okay? So, but in history, the Heritar could also be Lilith or Mary Magdalene. Lilith was the first wife of Adam. She was the one that said, I'm not good. Adam wanted her to lie beneath him, and she said, I'm not doing that. She was also the consort of God, so, she was equal. And when she demanded equality rights, she was cast to the Red Sea to copulate with demons, which I don't think is the end of the world. If I were Lilith, I think it's a better deal. She cannot be beneath the man. She is equal to the man. Or Mary Magdalene, who was a sacred prostitute, and also she was the one who funded Christ's entourage. She was a very rich woman, Madame Magdalene was. So those are some examples, just to kind of get your imagination moving, and that's what this is about. This is to get you to start thinking, how are these women, and how do I play this type, or how do I feel like I need to be more of this type, or how do I stay away? Like I just want to be the mother wife, and I'm too exhausted to seduce, or I just want to seduce, and I don't want the responsibilities of raising children. I just want to be with the man. Okay. That's extreme images. There's 1,000 shades in between that. I know I'm touching absolutely explosive images, all right? But we're not going to defend one of them. We're going to allow them to flow and allow them to flow within your psyche, because there's great wisdom and information in what we repress. And if we don't judge it and go like, well, okay, let me just see what that's about. I mean, we're living with it all the time. Then we can start getting some really fabulous insights, okay? So the Heritar is the one who it's usually the beauty industry. You know, she serves beauty. She serves Aphrodite. She is the female companion. That doesn't mean that she doesn't play on the girls' team. She certainly can play on the girls' team, but that her main focus, okay, is committed to the quality of the relationship life with her partner. And there are many women who decide, I don't want to have children. I want to be married. I want my partner, and I want to be connected to that, and that's all I want. I want to relate to those two, okay? Or it can be like Lilith, who says, well, if I can't, have my own independence, my own wisdom, my own freedom, I'm the lover of the divine, and now I have to placate Adam. I'm not doing that. She's not going to do it. So these women live inside of us. These archetypes live inside of us. We'll choose one over the other because that's how we want to live our life. Well, that's what works, okay? So it's a self-image, but if we cling too tightly to the archetype, it's not the final answer, because we are guaranteed to go into disillusionment. And there's a tendency for certainly the shadow of that archetype to come in our life, or we're in a loving and devoted marriage and suddenly there's an affair. Sometimes that's happening because the wife doesn't know how to call up the Harita. She's forgotten how to be the companion to the man she loves, okay? Or the woman who's in a relationship with a married man suddenly is upset because it's the holidays or it's summer vacation and he has to go with the wife and children. And so she suffers there. Again, these are extreme cases, but they happen all the time. And the resolution is to recognize, the resolution when these issues come up is first and foremost to recognize that these are the shadows of the type, and we're in some ways, we are not to blame, but we are in collusion with our opposites. And when we can understand it more, it's not so terrible. So I'm going to read something that I want to read because the lady is going to tell me to bounce pretty soon. I can't believe this went by. In the movie, Veronica Franco, Dangerous Beauties, Veronica Franco is courtesan, famous courtesan, and you can see how she gets trained and everything. It's very fascinating. But at some point, she's brought before the Inquisition, and she is to confess. And here is her famous confession, which I think all women should know about and in some way hold this true for their heritar within them. We have to honor these archetypes, okay? So Veronica Franco is standing, it's Venice, 16th century, and she says, I confess that as a young girl, I loved a man who would not marry me for want of a diary. I confess I had a mother who taught me a different way of life. And I registered but first learned to embrace. I confess I became a courtesan, traded yearning for power, welcomed by many rather than owned by one. I confess I embraced a who's freedom over a wife's obedience. I confess I find more ecstasy in passion than in prayer. Such passion is prayer. I confess I pray still to feel the touch of my lover's lips. His hands on me, his arms around me. Such surrender has been mine. I confess and I pray still to feel and be inflamed. I'm going to get cut off. to know that always this is mine. I'm going to post this because I'm about ready to get cut up. Sorry, and I will start next week with this. Left you hanging. Didn't mean to. Okay, I guess it's the eclipse. Let's blame it on the eclipse. Okay, tune in next week and go to Facebook, Venus Unplugged, Facebook, and like me, or call for an appointment, 212-757-8914. Bye.
They're gonna kill the love of my life. If I don't go back to what I was doing.
Our line of work is quite brutal and quite ruthless.
How far would you go for love?
You steal truck, bring it to me. Then you make your money.
Is it dangerous?
Of course it's dangerous!
Nicholas Hoult, Felicity Jones, with Ben Kingsley and Anthony Hopkins.
All this trouble, all this pain, for love.
Collide, now playing. Rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Collide, now playing. Rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Collide, now playing.